Hi, Tara here. I'm just here to talk about my final project. I have my cue cards here, but I'm going to post the whole project over there for you. So chapter 1, the perceptual process. I talked about the 7-step process and then the 3-step process. For chapter 2, the beginning of the perceptual process, I did talk about the 4-step process and how the image is actually created in our minds. And then I talked about myopia and hyperopia because I'm actually supposed to wear glasses. I'm blind. I'm consider myself nearsighted. I can see things close up, but when it comes to far away, I can't see anything at all. You'll see me out here squinting or something like that, or wearing my glasses. Chapter 3, the neural processing. I just talked about the way the brain works and the 3 light perceptions and the phenomena that are explained by the lateral inhibition. And then the Chevreul's illusion. For chapter 4, the cortical organization, which is your brain. I talked about the executive cognates and the perceptual cognates, which executive are like your behaviors, acts, your languages, the rules that you have to follow, and then the perceptual are like your senses. And then the 2 different areas in the brain, so the red and the blue, what they categorize it as, the red and the blue areas, and which areas are stimulated by either the executive or the perceptual. For chapter 5, perceiving objects and senses, or perceiving objects and scenes, sorry. I talked about Gestalt's approach to the perceptual grouping, and then I talked about the information within the image determines which group it's going to go to, or how it is in how it's processed in your brain. For chapter 6, visual attention, I talked about the Treisman and Schmidt illusionary conjunctions theory. And then the unintentional blindness, unaware of clearly visible stimuli, if not directing attention to them, which I think we've all done that before, but again, happens pretty often, so I just wanted to talk about that as well. For chapter 7, taking action, I talked about the ecological approach to perception, the experiment by J.J. Gibson, or the theory by J.J. Gibson, and then the brain's GPS. Those are my 2 categories there. And then the 3 questions that kind of we ask ourselves when we're trying to locate where we're at. So where are we? Have we been here before? And where should we go next? For chapter 8, I talked about motion, or I talked about the intentional capture. So predators and preys. Prey, you gotta freeze, don't move, or you won't be seen, or be faster than the predator, which you wouldn't be the prey if that was the case. And then motion after effect. For chapter 9, perceiving color, I talked about the Young-Helmholtz theory of color vision, and then I talked about Maxwell's color matching experiment. And basically like how it relates to me in the sense, colors, it helps us classify and identify objects. It helps us organize, and in some cases, maybe not mine, but it helps us forage food. In chapter 10, perceiving size and depth, the ocular motion cues, and then Emmett's law were the 2 things that I focused on there. For chapter 11's hearing, the 2 types of sound, I talked about the physical and the perceptual sound, and then the Bixby's place theory of hearing. I don't know if I said that right, but those are the 2 things that I talked about there. For chapter 12, hearing 2.0, location and organization. So how are sounds localized in space? I talked about the 3 ways that we hear and understand sound, the azimuth's coordinates, elevation, and then the distance coordinates. So left to right, up and down, and how far away from us is that object. And then I talked about the Downing's experiment with the 3 Blind Mice song. For chapter 13, speech and perception. So the process by which sounds of language are heard, interpreted, and understood. I talked of the experiment by Miller and Isard, and then the experiment with the ability of American and Japanese infants to tell the difference between the 2 sounds. For chapter 14, the Cadius senses, I talked about the 2 processes from which the senses go from our skin to our cortex, and then I talked about endorphins. And for chapter 15, the chemical senses, I talked about the 5 main taste qualities: the salty, sweet, sour, bitter, and the umami. And then I talked about how researchers have found it difficult to map the perceptual experience onto physical attributes of odorants. And then I talked about taste buds. And yeah, that kind of sums up what I talked about in my poster. Thanks for listening.